Sugar is a decoy. These neurons, unfortunately, respond to sugar, connect to the dopamine centers of the brain. Even if we don't taste the sugars, they're triggering these mechanisms. You just
do have these human bodies. You got to actually.
Yeah, you can't conquer but I think sleep is vitally important. Then I do think that foundational diet and supplementation. And from the literature I've seen, I'd love your thoughts on this. The literature that impresses me the most in terms of diet and the brain and brain states are the studies that look at EPA, essential fatty acids, and the gut microbiome. Those are the two things that, to me, it's undeniable. I don't understand how anyone nowadays could even question the idea that getting proper lipid intake, essentially
your brain is fat.
Yeah, these omega-3s are so important. I mean, in several double-blind placebo-controlled studies that I've read, it appears that getting 1,000 milligrams or more per day of EPA, so not just taking 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, but making sure that you're getting above that threshold of 1,000 milligrams of EPA from quality sources, compares just with similar effect as SSRIs, prescription antidepressants, but without the side effects, right? Which is incredible. And that if you are taking SSRIs, it allows you to take a much lower dose to still be effective. Sure. To me, incredible data. And then the other one is that ingesting fermented foods, 1 or 2 servings a day.
Sauerkraut for the brain.
Yeah, sauerkraut for the brain, or whatever given culture. Because what I learned, and this is very new and emerging data. There's a guy at Duke. He's incredible. He was a nutritionist, but then he has PhD in nutrition, and now he's a neuroscientist. His name is Diego Borges, not to be confused with the Argentine writer Borges. He's Ecuadorian, and he found that there are neurons in our gut of the vagus nerve. So these are neurons that live in the gut endothelium, and they sense 3 things. They fire electrical signals to the dopamine centers of the brain in response to fatty acids, right? They're when fats are, meats and things are broken down, and the fatty acids, amino acids of other kinds, so from protein, and sugar.
Sure.
And so these neurons can easily be tricked into signaling the brain to release more dopamine, and because dopamine is really the molecule of craving, into craving more of whatever activated those neurons. And so if you give these neurons enough EPA or enough amino acids, so protein and essential fatty acids, the dopamine centers of the brain are just firing like clockwork, which is going to enhance mood, motivation, energy. I mean, dopamine in proper amounts is a beautiful thing. Too high, obviously, you don't want, but you're not going to get it too high.
Look, people don't get addicted to chicken breast, but they get addicted to sugar.
Right. And I actually think that's because these neurons seem to be responding best to particular amino acids. They seem to want glutamine, of all things. They seem to want the omega-3s. And what's interesting is that even if they numb the taste so that people can't taste sugar, if people ingest sugar, these neurons
sugar receptors in your gut, right?
And they crave more sugar even if they can't taste the sugar. So I always thought that the dopamine release to sweet things was because it tastes so good. But the Borges lab results and some other work on dopamine more generally from my colleague Anna Lemke at Stanford shows that dopamine isn't so much about pleasure. We all, including myself, were taught it's about pleasure. Dopamine is about craving more of whatever it is triggered dopamine release.
Yeah, whether it's heroin or cocaine,
right,
or sugar.
And so
sex.
these neurons that trigger dopamine release, they are powerfully affected by these quality omega-3s and by amino acids. And then what's really interesting is that they trigger the release of dopamine, but then you say, well, okay, that should be pretty simple. We should, like you said, people don't get addicted to chicken breast. And I wonder whether or not that's either because omega-3s are too low, so these neurons are not, the full concert of these neurons isn't active, or it could be that for some reason that the other things that people are ingesting has messed up these neurons. And so the whole brain-body relationship is disrupted. And it's I guess Robert Lustig is his name at UCSF.
Yeah.
And others are now showing that some of the emulsifiers in foods and other things like that, what they do to the gut endothelium, I never really understood how the gut brain thing worked. But what I realize is that these microbiota, they don't care about us. What they do is they're trying to find conditions in the gut where the mucus pH of the mucus is just right. And that if people ingest emulsifiers and sugars, what happens is these neurons, and Borges' lab has shown this, that these neurons that are in the gut endothelium and can sense amino acids and can sense essential fatty acids, they actually start to retract their processes into the deeper layers of the gut. In other words, if you ingest the wrong things, pretty soon the neurons in the gut remodel the bad kind of neuroplasticity, and you lose your gut-brain sensing system.
Wow.
And so it's not just a matter of giving it the right things. It's really about, for many people, it's going to be about repairing this system and allowing this portion of our nervous system to grow back. Now, the nice thing about peripheral neurons is that they grow back. So wait,
I gotta unpack that, because what you said was just so profound right there. Basically, you're talking about uncoupling the natural ability of our body to sense its environment and to self-regulate in the right way to create health when we eat processed food that contains ingredients that screw up the gut microbiome or the lining, and all of a sudden that the brain in the gut, or whatever you want to call it, the neurons in the gut start to change as a result of the crappy food we're eating, and make us less able to seek out and want the foods that are good for us, and tend to make us seek out and want the foods that are bad for us.
Exactly.
That is a massive brain state shift for me, because I never really understood, the mechanics of how that happens. But it's clearly true. When people are eating bad foods, they want more bad foods, and they keep eating more and more of them. And there are many reasons for that, but the gut story is just fascinating.
Yeah, these neurons, and really, I tip my hat to the Borges lab. It's cool. Science, as you know, can get really entrenched, and then someone comes from a completely different perspective of, his background in nutrition. And he described, it actually it's a relevant story here. He had a friend who she was very overweight, and she ended up having a gastric bypass surgery, and she lost a lot of weight, and her diabetes went away. But she also started craving runny eggs, easy over,
sure.
runny eggs. But previously, just the thought of runny eggs made her nauseous, made her want to vomit. And he heard that story, and he realized that cravings themselves are modified by the conditions of the gut.
Yes.
How could this be? So he started exploring, what are these neurons in the gut? Who are they? What brain areas are they talking to? It's very clear that these neurons, they innervate the gut, they're part of the vagus nerve, connect to the brain areas that release dopamine and create craving. And so the health of these neurons in your gut is strongly going to impact what you want. Yeah. And so what I love about the literature, and I haven't had anything to do with the research I'm describing, but I've spent a lot of time with that work. What I love about the work that he's doing and others are doing is that it really points to the brain-body connection is mediated by neurons. B, that what we crave and what we seek really can change. I think that a lot of people that are having a hard time shifting towards healthier eating or healthier relationship to light, as we talked about a few moments ago, it starts becoming reflexive, because not just because it's better for us, but because our nervous system actually remodels itself in ways where the good stimulus starts to evoke dopamine release.
Yeah, I find that so true. If I go off track, I just want more of the bad stuff. If I stay on track, I want more of the good stuff. Right. Like I naturally will crave the things that are good for me. Mm-hmm. But I think what's happened through our radical dietary changes is we've gotten so far away from our natural sort of ability to seek out things that nourish us, and we've lost that. Animals have that. They're not going to be running around eating things that are going to make them sick and gain weight and cause damage to their gut microbiome or whatever. But they're not thinking about it. Their body naturally will seek out, I want this plant because it's got this nutrition in it, or this one has this phytochemical. They're not thinking that, but their body is telling them where to go and where to look and what to eat. Mm-hmm. We've sort of really decoupled our ability to be in touch with our natural healthy cravings, and have been hijacked by the food industry to desire all these foods that are driving us into worse and worse states of dysfunction, poor health, and poor brain states and poor brain function.
Yeah, it's interesting because the discussion about light and the discussion about food are remarkably similar from the perspective of these neurons in our eye. They don't think. They'll respond to light at 1 a.m. when you're watching Netflix just as well as they'll respond to sunlight because of their sensitivity at that time of night. They don't care. They'll work for you or they'll work against you. They don't have a mind of their own. They're just cells. These cells in your gut are the same. And so I think that what's exciting as more and more of the neuroscience and emerges and these other fields like nutrition start to really infiltrate neuroscience in a positive way, we're starting to realize that giving the brain and the body the proper stimulus, and there is a proper stimulus. There is a right time of day to get sunlight and light in your eyes, and there's a wrong time of day.
Yeah.
There's a right set of nutrients, amino acids and fatty acids are what your body really craves, but we've been giving it decoys, right? Sugar is a decoy. It really is a decoy. These neurons, unfortunately, respond to sugar, connect to the dopamine centers of the brain. And as I mentioned before, even if we don't taste the sugars, they're triggering these mechanisms. So I think that neurons are both beautiful and remarkable, but they're also dumb. They'll send these signals to your brain to a variety of things that you give it. So you want to know what is the proper input? Like, what do I need to give these neurons? When do I need to give it sunlight or amino acids, essential fatty acids? Because that's really what we crave. There's no essential carbohydrate. And I'm not an anti-carbohydrate person. I eat starches. I actually find them very useful for falling asleep at night.
Yes.
They really help.
Well, it's not only what to eat, it's what to eat when, right?
Right.
We're totally flipped in this country. We eat all of our sugar and starch and carbs in the morning. Not so much at night.
I tend to do it the opposite. I'll fast in the early part of the day, and then I eat meat and vegetables throughout the day, and then starches at night. That's just what works from a neurotransmitter perspective, to be alert and then asleep. The other thing I realized the other day is that it's weird because really healthy, clean proteins taste better than dirty proteins. But really healthy, clean carbohydrates, they're not as intuitively tasty as like chips and things like that.
Like what?
Well, I feel like I eat meat. So a really good steak tastes delicious. A lousy steak or like beef jerky is never as good as a steak.
Yeah.
Whereas a bowl of white rice is like, maybe it's just the way I cook it, is not as tasty as a bag of potato chips, right?
See, for me, I'd much rather eat a sweet potato than a bag of potato chips.
Yeah, I probably need to up my culinary game.
Like, but, it's interesting, we think, we sort of willfully want this or that food. I'm wanting this, but it's actually our brains are sort of taken over because we've not been treating them properly, and we're craving all the wrong things, and we're not craving the right things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've said this before, like when I walk by, for example, like a Starbucks display, and I see all the muffins or anywhere, any a croissant, it just doesn't look like food to me.
Yeah,
like, that stuff is lost. Like, why would I eat that rock? Like,
that stuff has lost its appeal to me as well. One thing that's relevant here that I think actually is useful knowledge. My colleague Anna Lemke, who's a psychiatrist, studies dopamine and craving. She explained something to me that it makes sense when you hear it, but it's not intuitive before that. Which is, if you've ever tasted like a delicious piece of chocolate, or you've had a delicious experience, I'll let people use their own mind to that, or something really, really wonderful that you love. The sensation in your mind is not one of pleasure, believe it or not.
What is it?
It's a sensation of craving more. And you can do this if you're a chocolate lover. I don't want to send people on a chocolate binge.
I can eat too much chocolate. There's a point at which I'm over this. Sure,
but absolutely. There's a point where you hit a threshold. But dopamine, we know this from animal studies and human studies, and this is one of the reasons it can create addictions in its extreme form, is that pleasure and pain have this reciprocal relationship. And when you eat something that tastes really delicious, if you just insert your mind into the process for a second, unless you're being very mindful and really kind of doing the Buddhist thing of really just tasting it, the way dopamine release works is it makes you think about the next bite. And this is true, imagine any experience. Oftentimes it's not just about the presence of the thing you're in, unless you've done a lot of conscious work around experiencing pleasure in all its like immediate container.
Right.
And this is why people gamble. This is why people eat more sugar. This is why people get addicted to anything. And so I mention it because when the first time I heard it, I thought, no, that's not true. I really love this experience or this thing. But then I started to pay attention, start to realize that oftentimes our mind goes to yes and more, please. yes and more please, as opposed to just, and that's dopamine release in full form. And so dopamine release is a little bit of like a jetpack that gets attached to us that puts us toward a destination. And dopamine isn't bad, but I think once people understand the nature of craving, they can be in a position to maneuver around it better.
If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.